Hi and welcome. My name is Megan Miessler, and I'm presenting Be Authentic, How to Talk About Mental Health in the Church. I was supposed to say that line for all of you. It's not really how I talk. I think I'm good to roll. Good? Okay, perfect. Well, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me today. I am from Florida, and it is freezing, so if you see me do this, it's because I can't warm my body up. But my name is Megan Miessler. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and rostered DCE, but I currently serve as the executive director at Lutheran Counseling Services in Winter Park, Florida. So one of my kind of passions, I think, coming out of COVID, although I say I'm from Florida, I don't know that COVID actually happened there. We didn't follow any rules or do anything that we were supposed to do. But the mental health crisis is through the roof, right? Would you all agree? Through the roof. And so for me, one of the things that I've been sharing the most is that I believe we need to be authentic and have authentic conversations. And so that's really what I want to share about with you a little bit today. I want to get you thinking for a moment. If I asked you, how are you feeling? Or you ask somebody, what's the most predominant answer you hear right now? Fine, good, right? And if they're really Jesus-y, God is good all the time, God is good, right? And for me, it just makes my skin crawl, right? Because I'm going to be like, you're not good. I know you're not good. I'm not good. We're not good. I run into a couple people I know here, and I said to my one friend, I was like, how are you doing? He's like, I'm not telling you, and I'm not looking at you, and I'll talk to you later. Because I know what you do, Megan. And if you're a therapist and you ask somebody how they're doing or how they're feeling, that's usually what you get. So things that I'd like to focus on in our discussion, in our banter, because I'd love for you to banter back and forth with me, is this idea of fixing and how we all get trapped in it. I want to talk about important conversations I think you need to be having for you, and then how to have specific conversations with other people around mental health. So if you're not up for that, I'm fine if you leave, but this is what we're focusing on. And in that, the idea that authenticity, being authentic and being honest about who we are and what's going on with us, is the only way that we help people not feel weird and alone when they're struggling with something. So even if you are a leader, an important faith leader in your community, I think it's so important to be authentic, which often makes people very uncomfortable. And that's exactly where I want you to be, uncomfortable. So first I want to tell you a story about Maria. Maria's a client I see. I started seeing her when she was in 8th grade. She had been Baker acted in Florida. It's a 72-hour hold in a mental health institution after making some statement about wanting to kill yourself. And she came to me, and her predominant thing is that she self-harms. And really, it's probably her self-harm that landed her in the mental health facility. And she wasn't really going to take her life, but that was the piece. And she comes from a really broken home, lives with a mom who's bipolar, just all over the place. It's a hot mess, right? But Maria's form of self-harm is one I had never dealt with before. Maria bites. She bites her arm in the same exact place. When she gets upset, overwhelmed, stressed, she bites her arm to the point where it's become disfigured. You can see a dip in her arm, like the skin, even in the bone a little bit. But that's her thing, is that she bites. And she's been doing it probably since she was 10. I see Maria now still. She's 26. And my thing about Maria is we've worked on a lot of things. She told me the other day, you're the only therapist who will call me out on my BS. Like, I will literally say to her, you're 26 years old. Pay your bill. Don't go get Starbucks, right? Like, come on, lady. But Maria still bites. She's made tons and tons of progress in advocating for herself and finding a voice, and even finding other coping skills. But when things get really, really hard, she bites. And to me, that's such an important story because she didn't come to my office to be fixed. Well, Maria thought she was going to be fixed, right? Because everybody walks in your office and says, tell me the magic solution so I don't do these things anymore. But we didn't fix that. We can't fix that type of behavior. Maria came in to grow and learn and have somebody walk beside her who's going to have authentic conversations. I don't do that well all the time, even all the time with Maria. But my point is we're not in the business of fixing. And if that's what you think you're doing in any type of ministry setting that you're in, you're wrong, because you're not capable of that. That's not what we're called to do. We're not called to give somebody a solution every time they walk in. That's not what God wants us to do. He wants us to walk with people in relationships. And when I became a counselor, I thought I was going to do a great job about fixing everybody. I was like, this is going to be awesome, and I'm going to feel so good about myself. That's the problem with fixing, is it becomes so much about you and yourself. And it took me a long time to be like, I can't fix anybody, but I can walk beside them. But it doesn't change that people come into the office wanting to be fixed, or come and chat with you wanting a solution to all the madness and all the stress and all the things that are going on. So we're not in this business of fixing. You probably do need to find a couple things in your life that you can see a beginning and end to, because every once in a while, right, if we're walking with people and nothing grows and nothing changes, it can get stressful and daunting on us. But when we're working with people, we're not trying to fix. Instead, I want you to think about this word of being authentic. Being authentic to me, as a leader at LCS, is, I have my teenager in the back, but she found a baby to play with, but I'm about to call her out, so she's in the striped sweater back there. But being authentic to me as a leader is if I come in to work and I've just been chewed out by a nice 14-year-old because she didn't have the clothes she needed to go to school in or something, right? And I'm coming in stressed and anxious, I'm letting that person know that's coming in and meeting with me. Hey, it's been a hot minute. 2 teenagers yelling at you if you made their coffee wrong, and a 10-year-old who thinks she runs the world. I'm not going to be quite on my game today, right? Or being authentic of a leader of saying, here's what I'm walking in this week, and if I'm short with you, right? If I don't take the time to fully listen, please know I still care and love you. Or being authentic listener. I think all too often when we're trying to listen to people, we think we know what they're going to say, or we think we know what they have experienced, instead of digging in and asking just a little bit more about that, or just saying, I've never experienced that. I haven't experienced my parents dying. I don't quite know how that feels. Tell me a little bit more about that. That's an authentic statement, to share a little bit about me so you can open up to me and I can hear you fully. And then being authentic people. I am a very opinionated person. I am the daughter of a LCMS pastor, and I do believe it gives me the free permission to not attack pastors, but know that they're human beings, right? And I can use very colorful language at times. I'm working hard not to do that right now because he said he was recording me. But that's who I am. That's just who I am as a person. I love hockey, and my Lightning got beat last night by the Arizona team, and I'm so stinking mad about it. That's just who I am. That's who I am, not in the role that I serve, but in the person that I am. And so when you can share bits of that with people, you're a better leader. You're an authentic person. When I can share stories with my clients about how, I have to stand at the bottom of the stairs for my 15-year-old son to come downstairs for me to say, I saw you today and you're alive. So that other mothers are like, that's not just me. My son doesn't just not like me. It's normalizing things for people. So when we talk about this word authenticity versus fixing, I think you need a little more characterization of what that can look like. If we're fixing instead of being authentic, I'm really here just to supply you answers. I'm not really here listening and fully supporting you. I just want to get you out of my office as fast as I can. I got other things to do. I feel like the Catholic Church. If you say 5 Hail Marys, you'll be good. Let's move on, right? Been there, done that. If I'm fixing, I'm looking to sweep in and rescue you instead of just giving time to ask if you're ready. My dad was the director of LCS for, umpteen years, and he tried to retire, and I took over for him, and we do this banter, right? And it's been a really great banter for us. I'll call him, and I'll complain about something, and he'll pause, and he'll say, "Do you want my opinion, or do you just need a place to vent?" And that has been so helpful for me, because sometimes I don't want your opinion. I don't want to know how you would parent my kids better or run this place differently. Sometimes I do want your impact or your input. But oftentimes, I'm just looking for a space to state things freely. And if he was trying to fix, he'd blast his opinion at me all the time. And I think that's such a helpful, valuable piece of making sure we're not trying to rescue. The other thing about being authentic is giving time. I was talking to Wayne Wilkie. I don't think he's in here anymore. But he was like, "I can't stay on Facebook anymore. Anytime I see a comment, I have to respond immediately, and I know that's not the best solution." Don't forget that 24-hour rule, right? Somebody blasts you something that's hurtful or mean or that you don't agree with. If you can take the time to think it through and give an authentic answer or solution or response, there's a lot more value in that, instead of being so immediate to get back to somebody. When I was going to take this role as executive director, I called, and I followed 2 men who were pastors, so that's a little difficult. I called Gretchen Jameson, great female leader that's been in our church, and I said, "You got to tell me something, because I'm going to follow these 2 men, and I know I have to do the job differently." And she said to me, "Don't apologize for taking time for your family." And I was like, "Yeah, of course. Got that. So easy. Of course," right? Seriously, hang up the phone with Gretchen. Next client comes in. They want to book an appointment. "I'm so sorry, my daughter has volleyball practice." What? Why? It just comes out of your mouth. It just comes out of your mouth. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." For me, it does. I'm not sorry. I'm going to be at every stinking volleyball practice and game, you betcha. 'Cause that's what I do. And so sometimes giving time to say, "I can't talk to you right now. I've got this boundary for myself." The people can figure out their own stuff when you give them time. If you're trying to fix and you swoop in to save the day and respond immediately, that has nothing to do with the person you're trying to help. It has a lot more to do with you. The other piece about being authentic, in my opinion, is that you value when people are uncomfortable. And it took me a really long time to settle on this. Clients would leave my office, we'd have difficult conversations, they'd come back the next session and say, "I really didn't like how you said that." And everything in me wants to be defensive. Why? Why is that so upsetting to you? What did I touch on that would be so important there? So when people are upset or defensive about something that we've done or something we've said or something uncomfortable they're going through, seeing it as a growth opportunity and instead of trying to sweep in and fix it for them is so important. If they're always happy, they're not growing. They're not changing. And being authentic is that you are taking that time for yourself. if I'm talking to you and we're engaging in a discussion, there's this dialogue playing in my head about why am I getting upset about what you're saying? Why do I want to say this? And would that be helpful if I said this? I'm not solely focused on you. I'm focused on what my body is reading and hearing and doing while you're talking to me. It's a difference. It's being aware of yourself. And being authentic as you share some of yourself. And I think that's the hardest piece. And listen, I'm a therapist, and when you go to secular school, they tell you don't say anything. I had somebody in school tell me, take off your wedding rings when you have an appointment, like when you meet with a client. I was like, you people are crazy. You have to share yourself some with those that you're helping. They have to know that, one, you're human, right? You struggle. That was the thing about being a pastor's kid. People would come to our house and we had a beer fridge because we were good Lutherans, but my friends were Baptists. And they'd be like, you have a beer fridge and your dad's a pastor? You know? Like you didn't, does he curse? Does he say bad words? Does he yell at you? Like, no, he walks on water every freaking day. Yes, he yells at me. I'm not gonna go listen to him preach. I just missed curfew. He's mad at me, you know? But it's that piece of, let's stop making it look like we have it all together in order to help other people. I don't have it all together. You don't have it all together. Doesn't mean we can't be helpful. And then the biggest thing about authenticity and not trying to fix, have your boundaries and say your boundaries. And have people around you that help you keep the boundaries. And those boundaries can be a lot of different things. Those boundaries can be what I want to share about myself and what I don't, and in what settings I want. Boundaries around my time. I will tell you, serving as a DCE, I was telling somebody this the other day, serving as a DCE and then going into being a therapist, man, if you're a therapist, people know you got 50 minutes. When I'm a DCE, they can call me anytime they want, think we're going to talk for 4 hours. It's not how it works, right? But it doesn't have to work that way in ministry. There are things that you have to respond to on time off, but there should be time off, guys. There should be time off. Not everything needs our immediate attention. And if everything needs your immediate attention, you are a fixer. And it's so important to get a hold of those boundaries. I talk with educators a lot. And here's the thing, I said I wasn't going to curse. Here's the thing that makes me mad about education right now. I believe there is an expectation, mostly by principals, probably by teachers too, that you have to show up with a smile and a happy face all the time. And I get it, we want a happy staff, but the kid that sits in the classroom that struggles with depression or anxiety, that has a happy teacher all the time, thinks that there is something seriously wrong with them. If my teacher can be happy all the time and I can't be happy for 2 hours in her classroom, what's wrong with me? When we continue to put on those happy masks, we are creating such a distance from those who struggle. We are showing them that you could be like us with this plastered happy face all the time. But that's not true. It's so unrealistic. And my dad will always tell me, okay, Megan, being authentic doesn't mean you have to be mad all the time. Like, no, it doesn't, right? But then that wouldn't be authentic. I'm mad all the time. No, I'm just joking. But it is that piece of like being honest about it. Being honest. I can be really happy today. I'm not happy here in Arizona because it's stinking cold, right? But there's a lot of things to be happy about at Best Practices. There's also a lot of things that I know are going on back home in the work I need to be doing. I'm going to walk back into a buttload of work, right? There's that dichotomy. But when we continue to wear happy masks all the time, not only does it isolate us from those that are struggling, it also does this weird thing where if I present to you like I'm happy all the time and you love me because I'm happy all the time, I'm not me in front of you. And then nobody actually likes the real me. And I see it happen repeatedly, and usually it comes from our family of origin of an expectation, right? That we say we're happy all the time, or that we don't let people know there's conflict going on. Happens in all families. Happened in our family just this weekend. My mom's 70th birthday. I'm so upset with my teenagers. Not really. It has to do with other stresses in my life. And on the way to the party, I'm crying in the car. You guys are so mean to me, and you hurt my feelings all the time. And put on your happy faces. We're going to a 70th birthday party, and everybody's going to be happy for Nana. And my daughter turned to me, and she goes, "You just know how to do that a lot better than I do." Oh. Right, Case? You know how to turn on the happy face when you're not happy better than I do. Oh, am I teaching that? I get it. There's a time and a place. I'm not saying that there isn't. But also that piece of like, can we just walk in and say, hey, we're a little grumpy? Because you know my teenagers are going to walk in and be like, you won't believe what mom just did in the car on the way here. You know? What if that was a little bit more out there? What if, what? First date behavior. I never heard it that way. Like a honeymoon phase kind of thing, too.
It's like, because they'll find out sooner or later if that's not you.
Right.
Yeah.
But if there is that piece where we continue to put that out there, they'll either find out it's not me, or they'll fall in love with somebody who's not me, and then I'll feel even more isolated and distant. So what does it feel like to take off the mask? Or when can you? Might be the better question, right? And as leaders, there should definitely be time with those that we lead that we are being authentic, that we are letting them know this weight is heavy. And I think there's a way that you have to be careful of how you do that. Because if every client comes in my office and I'm like, it's a day, I'm really stressed, at some point they're going to try to start fixing me, right? Or feeling like they need to take care of me. So it is a balance. How do you say that? What does it look like when you say that? Or who are you saying it to? And I want you to think about that in your life, there should be 3 authentic conversations that you are having regularly. And if you want it to be more than 3, fine, but it should at least be these 3. First and foremost, I believe you should be having authentic conversations with God. And for me, I was working with a pastor down in Fort Myers the other day, and he was like, we were doing so good. I got the budget back. The hurricane came, and we're like $1.5 million in the red, right? And I was like, that really sucks. Like, that wasn't your plan, right? And he's like, no, it wasn't. I was like, when those things happen, me and God, we just kind of go at it for a bit. Like, what are you doing? I had a plan. You had a different one, and you sabotaged me, right? And you know what he said to me? He's like, but I bet God forgave you for that. That he forgave me for what? Yelling at him? Like talking to him? Well, probably. If so, he's probably got to do it every single day because this is how we talk. And I just feel like that bold, blunt relationship with God where you're like, this sucks. This is hard. What are you doing? I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. I think you do regularly have to call him out when he's doing something good that you can see, right? When he shows up big. And then I also think, and I have a real big problem with this, that sometimes you just have to shut up and listen. Because it's a conversation, and God usually does have things to say. And one of the most beautiful things for me, example of that, is this story, this post. I don't know if you know this lady. She actually died of cancer not too long ago. She was on American Idol. The Voice, American Idol. Looking at my teenager because she's the only one who knows. And here's something she said in this blog post called God is on the Bathroom Floor. She said, I've had cancer 3 times now, and I've barely passed 30. There are times when I wonder what I must have done to deserve such a story. I fear sometimes that when I die and meet with God, that he will say I disappointed him, or offended him, or failed him. Maybe he'll say I just never learned the lesson, or I wasn't grateful enough. But one thing I know for sure is this: he can never say that he did not know me. I'm God's downstairs neighbor, banging on the ceiling with a broomstick. I show up at his door every day, sometimes with songs, sometimes with curses. Sometimes apologies, gifts, questions, demands. Sometimes I use my key under the mat to let myself in. Other times I sulk outside until he opens the door to me himself. I've called him a cheat and a liar, and I meant it. I've told him I wanted to die, and I meant it. Tears have become the only prayer I know. Prayers roll down my nostril and drip down my forearm. They fall on the ground as I reach for him. These are the prayers I repeat night and day, sunrise, sunset. Call me bitter if you want to, that's fair. Count me among the angry, the cynical, the offended, the hardened, but count me also among the friends of God. For I have seen him in rare form. I felt his exhale, laid in his shadow, squinted to read the message he wrote in the grout. I'm sad too. That's beautiful to me. God wants a relationship that's so authentic with us. He wants you to let him have it when you don't understand. He wants to banter with you. I think first and foremost, one of the most authentic conversations we need to have is with our Savior. When I was a youth leader, I would tell my youth, I found that I would use the language, my God tells me this. My God and I had it out last night. My God, the God I believe in, the God I can see and hold when things are stressful and hard. My God, this is my relationship with him. And I think that's important when we work with those who are struggling right now, to make that such a real relationship, that you're speaking authentically about the authentic relationship you have with God, who walks beside us and guides us. I also think you need to be having conversations with yourself. And I don't know that we talk about this enough. As a therapist, if I say, oh, have you been talking to yourself? And people will say, no, that would make me crazy, right? Like, we shouldn't do that. No, we really should. I've had more and more church workers that I've met with that I'm like, can you just pause and be like, this is what I'm feeling? I don't think we pause long enough to be like, what's making me upset right now? My 15-year-old son just started driving. If I'm anxious, I know why. My 15-year-old son just started driving, right? I'll be in the car and I'll hold that you-know-what bar, and he'll be like, what's wrong? Like, it's making me anxious. This is how I'm feeling. And other times I can pause and be like, what is irritating me right now? What am I thinking? Where is my mind actually? We've got to do that self-check-in. We have to observe our actions too. Why did I respond that way? Like, that didn't need all that, Megan. What were you doing? If we're not having that internal dialogue, we're not very self-aware of what's going on in there. And then other times, I've been telling people of this more and more, sometimes you just got to dump it all out. I don't care if you make a list, if it's messy, if you put your phone on voice record and you just say all the things you need to say. But sometimes we got to dump out everything we're holding in there. And in a lot of those reflections that I've done with people, I think people end up forgetting what they actually can control or are responsible for. Because I can loop on so many things that I have no control over. I can loop on all the crazy stuff going on the news, all the decisions other people are making, but this is the only thing that I'm actually responsible for. What I say, what I don't say, what I do, what I don't do, and what I continue to think. And you're only going to know what you're continuing to think if you pause and reflect, I've been thinking that. So if you're not having that conversation with yourself, you're going to really struggle to know what's going on with you internally. We are at we've been working a lot with Fort Myers. They're really struggling, guys. Like, I was down there on Monday, there is still trash on the side that has not been picked up. Like, still, people have mucked their house and it's still sitting there. It's so frustrating. And I get home and I'm like, why am I frustrated? Oh, because the rich people in Fort Myers have new sod and new roof, and the poorer people have trash on the side of the road with blue chalk. So I'm frustrated. We were down there, and a couple of people are like, I just keep spinning on these same thoughts in my head. And I think it was Rick, my dad, who was like, did you talk back to him? Did you answer those questions that are going on in your head? You should have an internal dialogue going, and you should be aware of what it is. And the third conversation I want you to be having is with your social circle. And I went back and forth on how I wanted to say that word, because I know you are church workers. And here's what I know about church workers. It's really hard to find authentic relationships where people love and care about you for you and not the role that you're in. That is so stinking hard. But you need to be having authentic conversations with people that love you for you. Not because you're pastor, not because you're DCE, not because you're teacher, but for who you are. And you need to have people that are going to give you honest feedback about yourself that makes you uncomfortable. Honest feedback. People that will give you affirmations and guidance and hold you accountable. 2 weeks ago, my husband has worked for Lowe's for 18 years. And 2 weeks ago, his position was eliminated. And he was given the option to go back in a store or to take a severance package. And this terrified mama of 3 who has 2 teenagers that are about to go to college said, you go work back in that store. And my husband went to his support group, and he prayed, and he had authentic conversations, because my conversations were very authentic about what I thought was the right decision. And he took a severance package. And those people that have supported him, they give him honest feedback. God, who guides him and guides us, put people in his path that said, man, there's opportunities out there. And is this woman still terrified? Yes, completely terrified. But you know that call process that we learn? You know that process of discerning calls that we're taught at school? To talk to God and God opens those doors? To have people affirm the decisions that you're making? You have to have people. You have to have a circle. You have to have people that hold you accountable and give you feedback. Which one do you struggle with the most? Authentic conversations with God, self, or your social circle? God, raise your hand. Self, social circle. I guess you know where you need to do a little work. The thing about this social circle piece, I think, we don't set us up for success very much in the church sometimes as church workers. And it's hard to find people that you'll be authentic with, because it can impact so much. In the counseling world, we call it dual relationships, right? Like, you're my kid's teacher, and we're supposed to be friends. But like, if I piss you off, are you going to give them an F? I don't know, right? There's these dual circles, these dual relationships, where balance can get really, like power can get really out of whack. And so finding people that you can connect with is really important. The last thing I wanted to spend some time on was authentic conversations around things that we're seeing in mental health. I presented at the National Youth Gathering on suicide. Suicide rates are off the charts. Kids are killing themselves younger and younger. There's no lie to that. I'm sure you're seeing that in your community. And so is self-harm. And I think it's really important in the church that we pause really quick and understand the difference. There's a drastic difference in suicide and self-harm. Suicide, you are trying to end your life. Self-harm, you are hurting yourself, and in my words, because it actually releases emotion and makes you feel better. It is not an attempt to kill yourself. It is actually a learned behavior, like I shared about Maria, and we need to respond so differently. And I think sometimes in the church, we don't get this right. And so I want to give you some clear language to do. So suicide. First and foremost, be authentic yourself. If you're nervous, if you're scared for them, don't make a promise that you can't keep. But allow them to have the negative emotions around you. Don't get scared of their emotions. Allow them to express themselves and stop trying to fix it. Don't say, oh, it really can't be that bad. Oh, you have people who don't minimize what they're thinking and feeling. Ask the questions. Do you have a plan? Do you have access to that plan? When do you plan to kill yourself? Everybody's always terrified to ask that because you think you're planting the idea. You're not. You are not. If they made any statement about killing themselves, you have to ask those questions. And you don't leave them. You keep them with you until we get them to a hospital or to a doctor or at least to a next step. Those can be terrifying conversations. And so what has been one of the best resources that we have used in our schools is this. It's an app on your phone. It's literally called the Columbia Protocol, right? Columbia Protocol. This app allows you to open it and hand it to the person who's suicidal. And it asks them the questions that sometimes are too hard for us to ask. And they hand it back to you, and it will tell you what their risk is and what are the next steps that you need to take. I had a pastor call me and say, hey, this kid's coming in. Mom thinks he's suicidal. What the heck do I do? And I said, download this app. Listen to him, validate him, make him walk through this app. And he emailed me 2 hours later, and he's like, that was the best thing. I was scared out of my mind. I listened to him, and it told me he was a low risk. We did a safety plan, and we moved forward. Great app, great tool to have, because sometimes in those moments you're rattled, and you don't know what to say and do. Anybody heard of that or used it before? No? Free app on your phone. Any of you had those discussions with people about suicide? Yeah? Terrifying? Did you have somebody to go and debrief with afterwards? If you don't have that, you need that. There needs to be somebody on your team, somebody that can keep things confidential, but those things are unsettling for us as human beings, and we need to be able to have authentic conversations to debrief ourselves after those things take place. Self-harm, I want you to treat it so differently. First, please never make them promise to stop. It is the worst thing you can do. By doing that, especially if you are clergy or a religious figure in their lives, they're not going to be able to stop self-harm behavior. It is a coping skill they've learned, and it's integrated in their brain. So when they do go and harm again, which they will now have heaps of guilt that they have let their pastor down or the spiritual leader in their life. Never make them promise to stop. Encourage therapy. Really, the only way to work through some of those self-harm behaviors really is to be in counseling. And if they say, I am in counseling, then you say, does your counselor know that you are self-harming? And if they do, that's great, that's what we want. If they don't, you either get permission or you ask them to go and share. Again, somebody self-harming doesn't mean they will forever, but that behavior will continue until we're in therapy. One of the biggest things I don't think we recognize the power of is changing the scenery. A lot of times kids that self-harm are so isolated and withdrawn, and getting them outside, changing the room around them, especially after COVID, that's been such a huge thing. But also understand, this is a long journey. For those who self-harm, it is a long walk. And you staying close, checking in, helping them know that they're loved and cared for is important. Just like the same thing when people struggle with grief. You stay close for a long time.
When
Yeah?
you say change the scenery, do you mean
For me, it means if they continue to do the behavior like in the same room all the time, I think it's important to have times where they're leaving their room or they're getting out. But also with you, when you're having these kind of conversations with people, my 15-year-old son's on the autism spectrum. He's not going to sit there and look me in the eye, right? Go for a walk with these people while you're talking. Take away that social expectation to have to look and face you while I tell you all these things. So a lot of times those who are self-harming keep themselves trapped in the same walls, in the same scenery, in the same. So either helping them plan for changes or you literally like, let's go, right? I think that's important. That's what I mean by that. The other piece on that too is when I literally change all the sensory around me, my brain changes, right? If I smell something, the neurons in my brain change what they're doing. So getting them out and changing that is really important. Other conversations we have to be having, that's all I'm gonna say, have to. Depression. How many of you have people in your life, in your congregation, struggling with depression? Yeah, right? It's an overwhelming sadness. A lot of times it's genetic. When we talk with people about what you're feeling, what's going on, what's keeping you isolated, those that struggle with depression often struggle to sleep, struggle to socialize, right? Don't exercise, and don't have regular sleep habits. So important as we're talking with people and listening to them to understand the bigger things that are going on or even the behaviors that are going on. Also, those that struggle with depression need to know that they're not the only one. So if I look in this room and amount of people that raise their hands that know people that struggle with depression, can we just all agree it's not 2% population of our congregation that struggle with depression, right? And so the more and more when you're talking with people that are going through depressive episodes, the more connecting them or sharing your story of a struggle with depression is so empowering. Depression makes you feel like you are alone. Nobody understands you. Nobody knows what you're going through. And so to help them not have that narrative, to share a little piece of what you have going on in your life, not for them to fix or rescue or save you, but to normalize what they are experiencing is so important. Mm-hmm.
I would say, because I have depression myself, and the way it manifested itself was anger.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's important.
I wasn't a woe is me kind of person.
Yes.
At least I didn't feel like it was, but yeah, anger was the issue.
And I think in men and women, right? Men and women, depression can show up differently, but even just for individuals. And so, wow, how powerful to share a part of how you experience depression versus how other people have, I think is really important. In kids, depression does not look like it looks like in adults. It doesn't. It doesn't mean the person that's depressed is isolated and alone in their room. Oftentimes, those that struggle with depression can be very outgoing. It's that beautiful mask that we wear, right? That we have taught our kids how to put on. But in a social setting, I feel so alone and like nobody loves me and cares about me. And so important in a lot of those pieces, depression and even anxiety, not only to work on, to talk with them that they're not alone in how they feel, but also that inner dialogue, right? That inner dialogue with God and with themselves. People who are depressed often struggle with self-esteem. Self-esteem is rooted and it begins in what your parents say to you and about you when you are a child. For some, for me, that was great. For others, that was awful. And that inner dialogue is so negative. And in the church, what we want self-esteem to be based on is what God says to us about us. And there's some powerful things in Scripture with that. There's some powerful things to help people do to change the dialogue. But please don't ever be like, well, go and read this in Romans and you'll feel better, right? Because that's not what it is. It's spend some time listening to what God says to you about you, play it on a Bible app, write it on bookmarks or on sticky notes on a mirror. Help change the dialogue in your head. Know that people with depression will struggle for a long time. One conversation with you and you tell them Jesus loves them does not fix this, right? It is a long walk. Same thing with anxiety. My favorite story from COVID, I've had this client, I think she's like 86, and I've seen her forever. And COVID hit, and she's just an anxious mess always. Like, she's agoraphobic, she doesn't like to go outside, all these things, right? So I called her, like, at the beginning of COVID, like, how you doing? And she was like, this is great. And I was like, what is wrong with you now? And she's like, everybody knows how I feel. You can't go outside, you can't do, everybody experiences the same thing. I'm not alone in this. For her, it leveled the playing field, right? If you didn't feel anxious during COVID, I don't know what you were doing. And anxiety manifests so differently with people. Here's the thing about the church, too. When we're meeting with people that are struggling, we should say depression. We should say the words anxiety. I was presenting on an educators conference a couple months ago, and one teacher literally was like, I don't know why these kids keep saying they're anxious. Like, they're just nervous. And my thing back to her was like, what's your problem with that word? Our teenagers will walk around and say that they're anxious now. They're not wrong. They're just a little bit more bold, right? Use those terms. Anxiety, one, is something in our body. I teach it as an alarm system to kids. God gave it to you for a reason. You need it at times. But sometimes those who struggle with it, the alarm's malfunctioning, and we need to work on it. What's setting off that anxiety alarm? Important conversations, but please use the words, again, so people know that they're not alone. My 15-year-old, when we're driving, he'll be like, why are you so anxious? And I was like, turn around and go home so I can get my anxiety meds. We'll try this again, right? I am anxious. That's what my body's doing to me. There's nothing wrong with that. It's that awareness of it. We definitely have more stronger mental health diagnoses coming up, being talked about, right? I think bipolar is one. I think we use it flippantly sometimes. True bipolar 1, taking myself wrong here, but you are hearing voices, you are hallucinating as part of your manic stage. There are many levels of bipolar. And so often a bipolar diagnosis doesn't mean that you go in full manic and, hear voices and stuff. But we definitely have people that struggle with ups and downs, right? I mean, I do. I don't know that it meets diagnosis level, but we have that. Depression, anxiety, bipolar are genetic, right? So understanding what's going on in your family, right? A lot of times. I had a man about 10 years ago as a client come in with this very first panic attack. Never had a panic attack before in his life. He came in for his first appointment and he goes, I want you to know how angry I am right now. Like, okay. It's like 45. My mother has been suffering from panic attacks since I was a child, and she never told me. And he was so mad. So mad. Because if she had been transparent about it, it wouldn't have blindsided him, he felt like. And so we had the discussion. What meds help for your mom? Go have that talk, because guess what? Genetically, it's going to help for you. But that piece of just being transparent and honest about things, especially for our children and our families. I think words like bipolar and panic, even personality disorders, really scare us at times in the church. I think we can probably spot people that we know are struggling in some ways, and maybe it's hard to ask the question of like, have you been diagnosed with something? And if they want to share, I think they will, but I think we should ask the question, have you gone to your doctor? What have they said is going on with you? And sometimes people are nervous. If I have clients come in my office that have been diagnosed bipolar, they don't want to tell me. That terrifies them, right? But in those type of behaviors, or in those type of diagnosis, especially bipolar, it's really helpful to encourage medication and a safety plan of some type. You'll see clients, or my clients I see, cycle through things. I'm doing so much better, I feel so much better. And we get off the meds and then it happens again. Diagnoses like bipolar personality disorders, they're long walks with people. Those are really long walks with people. That's something they're going to struggle with for a long time. And when they get that diagnosis, it's hard to grab onto it and embrace it because it feels really icky. And I say that as a person who was diagnosed about 3 years ago with fibromyalgia. And I remember getting the diagnosis and driving back from the Mayo Clinic with my husband, and he's like, all right, well, what are you going to do? Like, what's going to be our plan? And I looked at him and I go, I get 6 months just to be pissed off about this, and then I'll tell you what I'm going to do. And he was like, okay. But I do think it takes us some time because those diagnoses are lifelong, lifelong. Personality disorders show up all over in the church, all over, right? I think the two biggest ones that come up that people talk about, narcissism. We hear that a lot. I think we hear that a lot flippantly. And to be able to understand that to some extent, or just help people maybe. For me, the piece about narcissism is a person is not going to be able to apologize or admit wrongdoing. And if you really get someone who's in that place, you're getting to the core of what narcissism is. There are narcissism traits in people, but true to a person who's a narcissist cannot admit what they're doing. And borderline's another big, big one. I think we see a lot in the church. And for me, when I was working under my clinical supervisor, she's like, real easy, Megan. Borderlines cause chaos in every environment they are in. Every single environment. Live in chaos. And that's my short, edited version of those two. But I think we see that a lot in the church. I think we can see people that need to be cared for, not gonna lie, need our presence, but kind of run through us, you know? Kind of take all our resources. And so honestly, when we're working with people that really struggle with mental health, our boundaries are important because we'll get burned out. And so a lot of times it is, where are you referring people? How are you caring for them, praying for them, helping them, but then also saying, I need you to get other assistance. I think one of the conversations that always comes up when we talk about mental health in the church is medication. I think medication is such a fearful thing for people. And, you know, you can take all the analogies that you want. You know, if you had cancer and you didn't take chemo, being just like if you have depression and you don't take meds, right? But in all honesty, if we have families that for generations after generations after generations struggle with depression, it is no longer what is going on in your circumstance. It's also what's going on in your brain. And you can sit and talk therapy all you want 3 times a week. I can't change the chemicals in your brain. And so many people struggle with getting over that hump to use medication. And the more and more that you, as leaders, as people that walk with them and support them, can help them try solutions. Well, let's try this, what your doctor suggested. Let's try this and counseling. In my office, I always say, you know, if you got prescribed this, let's try it for 6 months. Just try it for 6 months, you know? And let's evaluate it as we walk through it together. But I think it's really important that we as the church look for things that are going to help as part of a whole plan for people. I have a client that I see that really struggles with anxiety and depression, and our appointments are on Wednesday because she goes to church on Sunday. And Sunday, she gets part of that treatment plan that she needs to be in community, to be loved on by people, and by Wednesday, we need to be back in the session. So often, a church and a church community can be part of a treatment plan for people. And so don't undervalue your conversations and support with people. Sometimes see it part of that overall treatment plan. What are some other mental health issues that you are dealing with in the church? In the schools? Do I have educators in here? Yeah? Any other ones? Yeah?
Lots of eating disorders. I don't know if those count, but
No, most definitely. Usually eating disorders are often dual diagnosis, right? And normally in mental health, working on the eating disorder, same thing with like addictions, getting that in order before you deal with the issue. But I think a lot of times we don't know there's an eating disorder in place. And so eating disorder and addictions need medical treatment. Need medical treatment as soon as you can get medical treatment because the long-term effects of that are great. But there is that piece of, and I'll go there even though my teenager's in the back, of what messages do we put out about people's bodies, right? How are we talking about people's bodies? Hey, I love the church, but as a female church worker who shows up at pastors' conferences, one more male pastor comments on the way I look, they might get decked. Because it is an issue. And you really don't know it until you're a female walking in here. I'm not saying here in all honesty. But it is a piece. How do we talk about people's bodies? What do we say about people's bodies? Men too. My teenager in the back is probably 5'11", my son's 6'2". She's like, why do they always have to say how tall I am? I know how tall I am, But we should be aware of what we're saying. It's that inner dialogue too. Why did I just say that? Why did that just come out of my mouth? But eating disorders, yes. Not that you cause them, but it is a message that gets sent, yeah?
I was going to say, and you touched on it, is the body image part of that. That's not just young children or young girls anymore.
No.
It's adults into their 50s and 60s who are saying, I have to lose weight because I don't look good enough for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think too, it's a little bit, men, actually teenage boys, there's a huge increase in eating disorders in teenage boys right now. I think there's another piece too of being honest about what your body does during stress. I live in Florida. It is dry as heck here. My body is swollen. It wants water, right? It is being aware of what your body does and teaching that to people. And those messages that we send. And then when we get it wrong, when we say the wrong thing, we don't just let it sit. We come back around and repair. Being authentic is having that self-awareness and wrapping back around and saying, I messed that up greatly. That's how you value people. I think the other big one we see in schools is ADHD and ADD, right? Attention and focus issues. And a big thing to note is in kids, a lot of times, ADHD or ADD characteristics present in kids that are anxious. It looks so similar. And most of the time, it's a dual diagnosis. I think we all struggle to sit still. They don't know that God made me able to sit still. And so being aware of that and what I need. I love going to meetings, and my friend Kurt Bickle's back there, and I remember him leading meetings and being like, if you need to get up and move, get up and move. Get yourself what you need, right? Take care of what you need so that you can be present. And if that means you're standing against the wall, if that means you're like my son and you're perching, I don't even know how he does it, do what you need to do for you to be engaged in what we're engaged in. The other big one, and my son is on the autism spectrum. I think we are seeing more and more spectrum diagnoses, and I'm seeing more and more adults undiagnosed that should be diagnosed. There is a piece where we have to realize what's going on in another person's body. My son was in the 4th grade when he was diagnosed with autism. And I remember sitting in the psychologist's office, my husband was next to me, and when they said he had autism, I was like, thank God he's not a jerk. He's not a jerk. He just can't read the social cues. And then I turned to my husband and said, you too, babe, you too. There are people that struggle reading social cues. There are people that struggle expressing themselves. Ask people what they're feeling, because we have been trained not to show it on our face. So don't assume that you know what they're thinking. Any other mental health issues popping up in congregations or schools that we didn't touch on? Yeah. OCD. OCD diagnosis is rooted in anxiety. It is out of anxiety. And it can be debilitating for so many people. And so, when we're having those conversations with people, I think sometimes it's understanding, what do you need to be able to get here? The worst that we see in OCD is like you have to knock 3 times on a door or jiggle a doorbell before you can leave. But helping people function with their OCD is important to me. I think people diagnosed with OCD need to be in therapy. There's a lot of behavior training, but mostly just so that they can get to a place of functioning. I had a kid in my office one time, and the mom brought him in, and I said, so what are you here for? She goes, he rubs his hair. It's like, okay. No, he rubs it repeatedly. Okay. So what's wrong with that? She's like, it's really upsetting, and he's not going to have friends because he rubs his hair. Right. So whose problem is this? And so I think a lot of times in those that struggles with those odd behaviors, it is that piece of understanding. Who's it upsetting? And if we can get them to a place of functioning, that's important. But they definitely need to be in counseling for a lot of those things. The last one for me is grief and loss. So much grief and loss. And for me, we see people in our office about 6 months after they've had a loss. And normally the first thing they say is, everybody tells me I should be over it by now. And it's like, I'm like, tell me who they are, I'll get them. Right? Grief and loss is a long process. You get past the first year, and then maybe things will start to settle down some. But when I have people who are like, I don't know what to say, right? That's always the thing. Well, I don't call you because I don't want to upset you, and I don't know what to say. And I will frequently tell people, ask them about the person who died. Say their name. Nobody's saying their name. Let them tell you a story. Let them cry. What's so wrong with crying anyways? Right? But people don't know how to journey with people who have lost individuals. And I kid you not, they come in our office 6 months after, because that honeymoon is over. People have gone back to their lives. They should be over this by now, and they don't know how to function. So the church, right? The church has such a great opportunity there to stay in touch, check in, be their community, help them figure it out, let them cry, for goodness sakes, right? So important, and say their name. Yeah.
I think grief is so personally unique to somebody's experience, and that why it wasn't as hard for me as it was for you. So I think you have some other issue you're needing to deal with.
It's not true. No. And I think sometimes the people that we do see, get back to normal, aren't addressing their grief, right? Put that mask back on. Everything's fine now. So the church has such an opportunity there. Yeah? And I think it does a lot of times go in with grief and loss. A lot of times trauma is a loss of safety and security. I mean, it is a loss of safety and security. But also this, again, depending on what the trauma was, right? And depending on how vocal you are about the trauma, and understanding how to work through that. If you don't know about EMDR therapy, that's great therapy for trauma, and literally looking up therapists who do EMDR, I think, is really important. But I do think trauma manifests like a loss in a lot of ways, and it's a long journey, a very long journey that needs that self-talk in there for sure. Yeah?
Our congregation has a school, and we do active shooter drills.
Yeah.
And so some of the kids are affected what could happen, and they're thinking about the future, anxiety about the future. How do you shield kids from those stories? How do you help them work through that?
So we were talking about this on a podcast I do the other day, and I hate shooter drills just as much as anybody hates them. But if we think about how much we hear about them and the anxiety that it causes just to hear about them, that they could happen at any time, then to have a plan for when it does happen, go with me there. It is a, how can I find control in the uncontrollable? What'd you say?
Having a crisis plan.
Right.
Before the crisis happens.
Right. So, the idea of should we shield them from that? It's just going to make them nervous. It's just going to, cause more anxiety. I am not a fan of people living in bubbles with masks on, right? There's mass shootings out there. There's crisis and crazy things that happen all the time. I think we address it. I think we say, yes, this could happen, and we're prepared and ready. So yes, it may make you nervous, but here are the things you need to do when something out of control is happening. And then you do have to discuss it. One of the things we put counselors in schools in, actually all of Florida now, and we had this one case on one campus, and a mom came, and the husband had just beat her up really bad, and he was coming up to campus, and they couldn't find him, and he had a gun. So SWAT came through the whole campus, right? And after that happened, my client came down, and I was like, how was that? Like, what went on? And he's like, my algebra teacher just put us in the corner, and we just kept teaching algebra, and after SWAT came in, she just told us we go back to our desks. I was like, are you freaking kidding me? You didn't talk about it? You didn't say, oh, automatic rifles just walked in our classroom. How do you feel about that? I was livid, and I expressed my things very expressively. So I think that is that piece. If we're going to have drills, right? If SWAT team's going to come in and sweep our campus, we got to have a plan of how we're at least going to say, how are you doing? That scared the crap out of me. How are you feeling? Right? You have such an opportunity. I know it doesn't feel like an opportunity, but as educators, as leaders, when somebody dies and you're sad, you have an opportunity to model sadness. When something happens and it makes you scared, you have an opportunity to model anxiety and what it looks like and how to respond to it. Don't lose those opportunities. They're so valuable. Don't be a leader that stands up and is like, I got everything together, I'm great. Because everybody sitting here will feel so unhealthy and dumb. Be authentic in those moments. I think it's so, so important. The other thing I want to share with you, and I'm fearful that is very small. We do a lot of response in crisis. And there's a lot of things we hear of like, don't say this as a church when I'm struggling. Don't assume you know what I believe just because I sit in your pews. Ask me what I believe. Don't just try to push off my feelings, but validate them. Normalize that I don't know what God is doing, and I doubt that he's even in control, because we've all felt that way sometimes. When I was a youth leader, spiritual questions were the best. Question God. Ask him about things. If you're questioning him, you recognize that he is in control. And that is powerful. And I really think it's important, and I hesitate this if there's pastors or spiritual leaders in the room, but just because somebody asks you a spiritual question doesn't mean you should answer it. There are many people that come into our office, and Rick, my dad, and we have some other ministers on staff, and they're like, well, what do you believe the Bible says about this? Why does it matter what I believe the Bible says about this? What do you believe the Bible says about this? I'm not saying don't answer all of them, but ask them, why is it important, your belief? And maybe help direct them to some things to develop their belief. But be careful when you just come in with an answer all the time. And don't argue with them. Don't argue with them about what they believe. Be authentic and share what you believe. That's often what I do. Somebody comes in and says, I believe God is just trying to punish me and he hates me. Okay, why do you feel that way? Because I believe that God challenges us. And I believe he has a plan. Where do you stand on that? But make it authentic conversations. And then help them use their belief systems to cope. My lady who struggles with anxiety, who thought everything was great in COVID, is Catholic. And she loves the Catholic chants. And so if I've been seeing her for a couple appointments and she's really, really anxious, she'll pull out her rosary and her Catholic worship and model that for me in session. What do people in your congregations do? How do their belief systems help them cope with things? So important to integrate that into how they're coping with the challenges in their lives. But be careful about coming in with solutions. Be really careful about that, because it becomes a lot about you and not enough about them. The one thing I share with everybody that comes in my office is that you need this on a daily basis. I am currently 2 for 2 today on this. But you need this. You need this regularly. You need to exercise. And that means raise your heart rate for 30 minutes. My son on the autism spectrum, he needs to exercise, and when he was young, he hated it. So literally, got him a plastic sword, turned on that bubble machine. It would go for 30 minutes, and he karate chopped those things. Be creative, but raise your heart rate. Sleep. Everybody gets mad at me when I say this, but napping does not help you sleep overnight. Now, there are people who need to nap, and I get it, but if you are struggling to get 6 to 8 hours a night, uninterrupted sleep, stop napping. Or, in all honesty, seek out some medication that's going to help you. You need your REM sleep. Mental health is so closely tied to sleep. Anybody who comes in your office, ask them if they're getting a good night's sleep, because this is a huge struggle in our society right now. Nutrition, you need to eat. Sometimes you need not to eat as much, right? But your body needs fuel. It does. And so checking in with people about their nutrition is important. And then socializing, I've told this to you. You need to connect with people that love you for you. You for you. I get ripped all the time about technology and blah, 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 blah. If it's all you can get some days, then pick up the phone. If you can jump to FaceTime, then FaceTime. But connect. Face-to-face is the best connection, but it's not always possible for everybody. Sometimes people use Marco Polo. Sometimes people use Snapchat. I don't care. But connect with people who love you for you. Those are my 4 pillars that I talk about with people, but you need it daily to be a healthy human being. So if you're feeling off, check in on that. 2 other things I want to share with you. That cut off a little bit, but I'm part of this team that's putting on Emergent Leaders down in Florida. If you need a nice vacay and you want to be part of a good leadership program, please check that out. I know Kurt's here. I don't know if anybody else from our team is in the room, but would love to have you be part of that. We're kicking it off, Kurt, in the next month, too? April? Right after Easter, because we're not going to interrupt Lent. Right after Easter. So if you want to be part of that, that would be great. And then also, me and my development coordinator do a podcast called It's Okay to Not Be Okay, just trying to encourage authentic conversations that I think we need to be having on all different types of topics, but I'd love for you to check it out. And then that's my information if you'd like to chat. I'd be happy to take any questions about things that we talked about, but also want to respect your time, so I'll stick around for a little bit as well. But thank you for attending, and I hope something in here was helpful for you today.